Welcome everybody at Getting APIs to Work. Today we say hi to François Lascelles, Chief Architect at Axway. Hey François, how are you doing?
Hey Eric, I'm very good. How are you?
Good, good. Thanks for joining. So today we want to talk about the Peloton API leak. It's very interesting because it's about APIs, and I think it's also interesting because it allows us to learn a little bit about what happened, and we'll talk about what happened, maybe why it happened, and how we can prevent that from happening again. So let's start looking at the Peloton case. What have you heard and what happened?
Yeah, Peloton. It's interesting because the way that this whole started is very similar to a lot of other incidents involving APIs that happened in the past, right? There was a little bit of deja vu with this Peloton API security incident.
What was the one thing that came to your mind in terms of, prior cases?
Yeah, so a lot of other applications that have a social aspect to them tend to have this API that allows you to connect with, other people that you already know, but you might not be necessarily already be connected in that particular platform, right? So these apps tend to expose an API that are kind of like, find my friends, right? So then the app gets permission to go into your contact, and then maybe they're searching by phone number or something like that, just to create these connections, to create this community in the app. And we've all used that. It's very convenient. And that's what I thought about and with the Peloton API. Sometimes you have an API, it's just convenient to leave it open right there for the purposes of your app. It returns data that's sensitive, right? Other subscribers' data. So that's what I was thinking about when this thing first came out.
Yeah, it reminded me of the Pokemon Go thing, where also people kind of designed it as a private API, right? It was only designed to be used by the Pokemon Go application. But of course, it was externally exposed because, people are playing everywhere, so it needs to be externally accessible.
Yeah.
And I think, we have the same situation here, right? Where the API was designed to be private, only used by Peloton applications.
That's right.
But it was actually accessible to others as well. And that I think was the big problem there, including then the facts that you mentioned, right? Which kind of data was actually exposed. And then we also had a little authentication snafu. So what happened there?
Well, I mean, if you think of the top vulnerabilities in APIs, the way that OWASP API Security Top 10 thinks about it, right? So the number 2 on the list is broken authentication. That's when you have either a way to work around the authentication or the API, because as you said, it's meant to be private. Therefore, somebody decides along the way, well, we don't need to authenticate that. That's private, right? So there's no authentication. So that's the number 1 problem. Which makes it obviously easy for somebody who can reverse engineer the API to just use it without any authentication. I think that was the first thing here that happened at Peloton.
That was to me, the storyline was interesting, right? So when it was reported, I think in late January, it was completely open, right? Like you said, right? No authentication at all because, we didn't tell anybody about it.
Yeah.
And then they reacted actually relatively quickly within a couple days and closed it, but they closed it so that now you had to be a registered Peloton user. So, now you had to be one of the privileged millions who can freely create Peloton accounts. So even though it was authenticated, then that was not super helpful, I would guess.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is a huge lesson in API security, right? Hackers are also users, right? If anybody can go on your platform and create an account, then the fact that you are validating that, this is one of my users, doesn't really protect you that much from the perspective of, is that person trying to do something bad with my API? It's 0, right? Anybody can go on Peloton, create an account. So, yeah.
Yeah, that was particularly weak, I think, the way they fixed the thing. And then the other thing I found interesting is that there seemed to be some kind of internal process problem where they, after those couple of days, when they fixed it that way, nothing happened afterwards, right? And I think that vulnerability was pointed out over and over again, and nobody did anything before it was actually handed over to a journalist. And then I think things became a new urgency to them. But that kind of process problem where somebody does something and then everybody assumes, oh, that's probably good enough, right? Like, how would you think that is, how could that be handled better? I think that that would be an important lesson for a lot of organizations to say, well, incidents happen, but we should handle them in a good way. I think that that is an important part here.
Yeah, this is the part of the story where, we like to speculate a little bit because we're not on the inside of Peloton here and we don't necessarily know how the process broke down. But I think that, you can imagine that, the people that are receiving information about the API and security incident, they might not have an understanding of this API level awareness, right? Or I think one of the big problems that people are talking about in API security these days is visibility. Do you have a clear picture of all your APIs across your organization, right? If you're not aware of a specific API, then obviously you're not on your way to securing it. So yeah, what happened with the process there is very. I would love to be a fly on the wall on the post-mortem there, because I'm wondering if the people that are responsible for security don't necessarily take an API layer visibility to API security. Maybe that is not part of the practice over there, but I think it's really important to look at the data that flows through your APIs, and the API layer is, your point of contact with the outside world. So yeah, it's a really, really important thing to look at from an application security perspective.
So you said that, the security folks might not have a primarily API oriented focus or something like that. So I'm wondering what would your recommendation be to say if you want to be more aware for that specific threat and for that specific area that you also have to cover, what would be a good pattern, a good practice to put in place so that this is handled better?
Yeah. So again, I have not worked personally with Peloton, so I'm not sure exactly how that thing breaks down for them internally. But I know that for a lot of organizations I would work with, the people that are responsible for APIs are not necessarily, especially in larger enterprises, right? The people that are responsible for the API and the API infrastructure tend to be in a separate group from the people that are looking at security overall for the organization. So I think that that's one of the things where you really need to create that link between these two groups. I think it's important to give to the security group the visibility over your APIs. I think it's a good lens over how your application is doing and stuff like that. And I think there's a lot of security implications. So I think one of the recommendations would be really to create that connection between those two functions really inside of an organization.
So visibility is an important part there. Yeah, I would, and I've had the same observations that you had, that sometimes there definitely is a certain disconnect, so to speak, or it's definitely different groups who are in charge of doing that, which is totally fine, but they need to know what they're doing.
Yeah, agreed.
So then I guess after, if we look at what happened and now actually it has been fixed, even though I'm not even sure exactly how it has been fixed. That would be interesting. My theory was a little bit that the first fix happened quickly because they could actually do it in some kind of API gateway, where they could quickly just switch on authentication, which was not sufficient. But they had done something in the infrastructure, and then that. For the second fix, actually fixing it, right, that would have required either patching the implementation, which is harder to do, or also implementing actually new authentication methods in their infrastructure, which also is quite a bit harder to do. But yeah, it's pure speculation, I guess.
One of the things that we were talking about earlier that you were explaining me, I think, was about how maybe the data that was flowing through that API, maybe all of it was not actually necessary for the application. Maybe there was a little bit of an aspect where the API just returned more information than was needed, right?
That is a very good point. And yes, we have missed that before, right? That at least some of the data that were the problem was data about private accounts that in no case ever would need to show up in the API. So I think this idea that your API should only expose as little data as you can get away with, right? I think that is definitely not what they did. So they were kind of trusting that the API consumers would ignore that data or hide it or whatever. But instead of that, it probably would be a little bit more secure to say, well, if we don't expect anybody to use it, then why put it in the API to begin with, right? And that's another, I think, also a little bit of an API culture where you probably should rather say, if I don't know why I'm putting something in there, then I probably should not put it in there, right? I'm on the safe side of things.
That's right. And then from a process perspective, right? We were talking about a failure of process here. From a process perspective, what I was saying earlier between connecting security and the API layer, if you think about, somebody who's doing application security testing, and they're doing this by doing testing end to end. So if I'm using the Peloton application, I only see the data that the app is showing me. So I'm not aware that all this additional data in the background. That's why you need to do your security testing needs to include at the API layer. That's what I meant earlier, because now if you're starting to test at the API layer, if you skip the application side, the client side application, goes straight to the API and you test it there, you'll see, oh, wait a second, all this data would not be here, right? Like I don't see this in the app, but somebody could exploit that. So I think that's the other lesson learned here.
Yeah, definitely. That is, if you just look at the app and say, oh yeah, fine, that I don't see any data in there that's problematic, that doesn't really mean that there's no data flowing to the app. That's not the case. Yeah, interesting thing. So I think we've learned another little story. It definitely won't be the last, I think. But yeah, that's good. I think, every time we'll learn a little bit more how things can fail, and the community learns a little bit more about what to watch out for. So I think it's definitely an interesting lesson.
Agreed.
And in that case, I think nothing bad, we don't know if anything bad happened. Let's hope it didn't. So.
Yeah, and I mean, that's another point then, right? If you are going to get breached somehow, right, nothing is bulletproof. It's not just good enough to detect the breach, but what data was breached, right? Do you have that visibility, right? So we're talking about API security process, we're talking about connecting the dots, but there's also something about observability of your APIs and being able to go back and say, which customer's data was actually breached by an exploit of this thing before we were able to fix it. So I think that for organizations that expose APIs, this is a good example of why you would want to be able to do that kind of auditing or detailed information.
Yeah, I think in that case, that will be really hard, because at least, when they still had it in place as they had initially, where there was zero authentication, then it's really hard to track kind of anything, right? You have no idea, was it just like exercise bikes that accessed the API, or was it some intruders? Like you can't tell, right? It was just API accesses, unless you have some specific way of how your apps identify. But if they don't have authentication, that's probably not the case. Well, I guess we'll never find out. But I think in this case, really, it's probably the risk isn't too big, because the personal data was kind of limited and there was no credit card information and these kind of things. But still, something to learn something from.
Agreed. Yeah.
Okay, François, thanks so much for joining. I hope. And by the way, since we're on record here, I think what we should do next is talk about the OWASP top 10. I think that would be a really nice topic. Are you up for doing that?
Yes, the API one, right? The new one.
Yes. The OWASP. Yes, they have lots of top 10s. You're right. The API ones. Yes.
Let's do that. I look forward to it.
Okay, great. So I'll see you soon. And until then, thanks a lot. I hope everybody liked this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. And until next time, bye-bye.
Thanks, Eric.